I'm Sara. I'm 29. I live in Montreal, Canada. I am a content creator, a model, as well as a marketer. I love everything to do with design and aesthetics and creativity and fashion. My story goes way back. It started when I was 3 years old. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. Being a child, my mother realized the first signs of it were blood in my stool. I was not wanting to eat. I was just like crying all the time, and I was going to the bathroom a lot more often. So she brought me into the hospital. They did a colonoscopy and they had diagnosed me with ulcerative colitis at that time. Throughout my childhood years, it was pretty much managed by medication at that time. I was still able to, lead like a typical childhood lifestyle. Where my story took a turn for the worse was in 2006. So, March 2006, I went into the hospital emergency and I was in excruciating pain after quite some time. My bowel movements had increased, the blood had came back. I was just not wanting to eat, and we just knew something was wrong. It honestly just came out of nowhere. I was really fine up until a couple weeks before then. We didn't go right away. We wanted to see maybe if it was just like a flare or something, or we could manage it, like at home. They did a colonoscopy and they had diagnosed me with Crohn's disease. So the colitis had essentially spread throughout my entire digestive system. I had and turned into Crohn's. The Crohn's was I had ulcers in my mouth. It affected my small intestine, my large intestine, and there were signs of it in my rectum as well. The initial treatment plan was 100% to put me on the prednisone steroids. I was literally taking like 5, 6 pills a day sometimes, and then to try different medications. I don't remember the exact medication at that time, but throughout those 2 years, I literally tried Remicade, Humira, methotrexate, Purinol, Pentasa, Imuran. Probably ones that maybe they don't even use now because this is literally so many years ago, almost like 16 to 18 years ago. Um, but it was just a matter of we need to get the Crohn's under control. We need to, get Sarah to be able to live without pain in the meantime, while the medication, is going to kick in and start working. And we need to make sure that she's able to eat. I would say those were like the top three, action items from my doctor at the time. And my doctor, was an amazing doctor at the time, and he literally did everything he could to help me. And it was always such like a two-way street. I was always, even though I was a kid, I was always so aware of everything that was going on, and I think that helped with the coping mechanism as well. But throughout those 2 years, like it was just a matter of like we would try medication and my rate of inflammation would just be, the same and my pain would not be going away. And, as we all know, a steroid, prednisone, is not something that you can live on. Like that's something that should be short term. A week, 2 weeks max, even that is like super intense. Um, I was literally like, I was living on it for, periods of months, literally up to a year. And then would try to, pull me off of it. And it, my pain would come back and, it was not possible. And, long term, the prednisone gave me compression fractures in my spinal cord. That was, another piece of my journey that, as a kid was extremely, on top of it being extremely painful and it happening when I was like walking outside. It was just another thing to add to the mix. Nothing was working. It got to a point, May 2nd, 2008, where I was rushed in for my first emergency surgery, and I woke up that day after the surgery with an ostomy bag, which starts kind of like chapter two of my story. An ostomy is not something an individual, I think, ever, asks for or wants. If you're somebody in my situation and the doctor's telling you you need an ostomy bag, it's pretty much because it's life or death, which it was in my situation. My intestines were just so sick to the point where they would have ruptured inside of me. And I was so malnourished because I was not able to, eat. I was not digesting my food. And I got a colostomy. I remember waking up from that surgery. I think it was like an 8, 9 hour surgery. They took 2/3 of my large intestine out and they gave me a colostomy. I remember so vividly waking up, in post op. And the first thing that I did was I took my right hand and I slowly slid it down my hospital gown. And I just wanted to touch. I just wanted to feel. I just wanted to know, like, is it there? Like, I think a portion of me, like a part of me was kind of convincing myself, like, okay, maybe they'll be able to operate and I'll wake up without the bag and they'll just have said that they just need to remove a piece of the intestine. So it was almost like I was trying to like psych myself into, thinking that this was not actually my reality because it was something that I, you know, did not want. And I remember, sliding my hand down and feeling the bag. It was, the clear bags that every hospital gives you. Like, no ostomy likes those. Those should not even exist. um, and I felt that bag, and I remember literally like retracting my hand back literally so fast and just, feeling like an out of body experience and being like, oh my God, like it's there. It's attached to me. After leaving the hospital, obviously, in terms of figuring out how to, change my ostomy and dress with my ostomy and, care for myself and everything, I, saw stoma nurses and I, would have my doctor's appointments and everything. And in terms of within my personal life, um, I worked really hard on being able to, adapt to ostomy life, but a huge component about it was I still the biggest challenge and the biggest struggle that I had within my ostomy life journey was getting over what others would think about it and still seeing it that others would look at it as a negative light and others would be like, oh, she's gross, oh, she's disgusting, oh, she has this bag and all of that. And that negative stigma, unfortunately did get to me. And it was something that I feared a lot. I hid my ostomy publicly from the world for 15 years. I've had my ostomy now for 16 years. And in total, I've had 5 surgeries. So after that first ostomy surgery, I did go in for 4 more surgeries. They turned it into an ileostomy. And then eventually they had turned it into a permanent ileostomy in my late teens, early 20s. That's when my journey took a massive trajectory when my ostomy became permanent. My surgery where I got my permanent ileostomy bag, my protectomy, where they removed the booty hole and they turned into a Barbie butt, was my early 20s. And at that point, that surgery is one of the most intense, challenging surgeries mentally for an ostomy, I think, to do. I see so many people online, now in my community that talk about it. And um, what comes with it is it's a permanent decision that you're making for the rest of your life, and that ostomy is going to be with you for the rest of your life. For me, I was still adapting to ostomy life. Um, I knew that there was still so much work to be done. I was, still in hiding. There was still so much more to discover of how an ostomy impacts my life and how I was going to navigate life with an ostomy in new situations. My main deciding factor, I always say, was I had just thought back to how much life I had already lived from 2008 up until that point and realizing that I would not trade that in for the chance of, going back to that place that I was before my ostomy. And, you know, for me, that was such a sign of, understanding and, maturity and growing up and realizing, because that analogy that I had was the complete opposite when I got my ostomy. Um, when I had got my ostomy, I was like, how am I going to do this? Whereas when I was faced with the decision of getting my protectomy surgery and making it permanent, I was like, I want to do this. I never want to go back to where I was before, because that is like so traumatic and there's so much pain there, and that will hold me back and I will not be able to live a life like that. So I had decided we're going to make this ostomy permanent. I understand the impact of that, and I'm willing to put in all the work that I can to someday. Um, I didn't know what day that was going to be, but to be able to live my life authentically me and not be hiding it. Um, to emphasize the hiding, like as I got older into my 20s, and I did start, wearing bikinis or tighter clothing, I would Photoshop my pictures and make sure you couldn't see anything. In terms of, like, there was one bikini picture that I wanted so badly to just fit in, and I wanted to post this picture on Instagram so badly, and I literally completely photoshopped out the bag. I would obviously was starting to date. I was having relationships where I was not telling my partner about ostomy life. Um, and those relationships, like, we did have intimate occasions, and I would not tell them about the ostomy. I would keep a sweater or a tank top around my waist. I would, flip up the bag beforehand in the bathroom, and I would basically just tell them, like, I have scars, even though it wasn't the reason for that, just I had surgeries, I have scars on my stomach, don't move my sweater. Um, and yeah, like, I did, it was, to me, that was the last piece of my puzzle. I was working so hard on, my inner acceptance and within my own personal life to be okay with ostomy life. And the last piece of my puzzle was to be okay with it in the exterior, in with, the outside and everybody else and just the public in general. And if I were to meet somebody new or whatever, it's not something that I'm going to want to be holding back, because, you know, it's there with me 24/7 to, conceal something and hide something about you that's literally on you 24/7, um, is is very challenging and very time consuming, and it's very mentally draining as well. There were a lot of challenges and there were a lot of uncomfortable situations I had to put myself in order to get myself to be where I am now, which is just completely comfortable with my ostomy and being able to say, I have an ostomy, I go poo in a bag. I tested myself to explain my situation to, some new friends. There was one occasion, two of my best friends to date now, literally sisters from other misters. We had gone to my cottage house, and I wanted to, really wear a bikini. I would wear a bikini in closed environments where it was either like I was like at my family's house in the backyard, or like I was at my cottage. I was not wearing bikinis to beaches. I was not wearing bikinis anywhere. And I remember wanting to, wear a bikini on my cottage. And I had told my two best friends um, in the bedroom, and I had said, you guys, I have something I want to share with you. Uh, like, we're really good friends, and it's something a big part of me. And I proceeded to tell them about, they already knew about my Crohn's disease, but they didn't know about the bag. And, they greeted me with, such love and such support. And, feeling that love and support coming back um, was so motivational and so encouraging and so soothing that in turn, those positive reactions and that positive reinforcement allowed me to carry myself to the next level, or the next challenge of me trying to become even more adapted to ostomy life. Back in 2019, I was a big turning point. I went on a vacation, a family vacation to Cuba. It's something that I've spoken about quite often with my community. And I did something super courageous because I was going to a completely new country where there was no chance of me seeing anybody that I knew. I was like, okay, I'm gonna pack nothing but bikinis. And to what I just said, I typically would only wear bikinis in like closed environments where it was like my house or like my best friend's house that they knew already. I was not wearing them in public. Um, And, I went to the Cuba trip and I wore nothing but bikinis, and it was a great experience. I walked that beach still, with my hand a little bit like in front of my stomach, like covering the bag slightly, but like I was doing it. It was happening. It was another, milestone in my personal journey of me being able to, build up the confidence to do a new experience with Ostomy Life. Because, through your life and through your ages, there's so many different new occasions that are going to happen, and your ostomy is going to be there for it. It was around last summertime where I had went on a solo vacation back to Cuba. It was the first time returning to Cuba since that Cuba trip, so it was kind of like a full circle moment. And I noticed that I was, walking that beach in a bikini, and I was, not having any worry. I didn't even realize I honestly even like had a bag. I was just so confident. I was completely on my own, so I had no support system there with me. And I was like, wow, like I have really come super far in terms of, my personal journey of being able to completely just live my life. And I have a bag, not like I have a bag and I need to live my life, but just living your life. And the bag is merely just an accessory and is there, along for all the rides and the adventures. And that's when I realized I'm like, you know what? Like, I think I'm ready. Like, I've just reached the point where I've lived long enough where I have been just hiding. I want to just be me. I was, struggling. I was taking pictures in Cuba and I was, still trying to hide the bag. I would hide the bag with, like bikini cover ups or magazines or sun hats, or, purses, beach bags. And this is how I was, starting. This is how I would typically post my pictures, with always like an object or something, covering the bag, or it would be, like a back shot or something. And I just realized at that point, like being in Cuba on my own, I'm like I'm really on my own and I feel so comfortable. I think it's so important to raise ostomy awareness and have that representation, because that's something that I think as a young girl severely suffered from. Seeing everything, online and what media puts out to be the, perfect female or whatever people want to call it. If you don't see an image or representation of something that you are, that resonates with you, it's very hard to, see the beauty in yourself and see that confidence and be like, okay, there's space for me, or be able to like relate to that person. um you can't relate to somebody that is completely entirely different from you, especially in these situations, by seeing people and by seeing other ostomates, and even me now in my journey, seeing other ostomates in my community. When I first started sharing my story, there was still so much like strength that I had to build, and so much more comfortability, in terms of even just like types of content that I was posting. I, was not posting with a filled bag. I was only posting with an empty flat bag. And by seeing others in my community embrace what we call the bag bulge or the filled bag, I was like, hey, if they can do it, I can do it too. Like, this is totally okay. Like, this is completely normal. It gives you a sense of, home. It gives you a sense of community. It makes you feel safe. It makes you feel, included, and, that there's space for you. And, ostomy is an invisible medical device. If nobody is, putting it out on display, nobody really knows what it is. And it is something that is different. Um, Quite cool too, if I must admit, to know that, surgeons can literally reroute the entire human body and do this. I always say our bodies are like a Picasso, like a Mona Lisa. It's been about 4 or 5 years now that my Crohn's has actually been in remission for the first time. I'm on Stelara medication, so I self-inject, needle to the thigh. Um, it never gets better every time. I'm always like, 1, 2, 3, let's go. Um, and that feel will never go away. It's a needle. It's scary. But I do that. I started that medication. Also, I think it was like about 5 years ago. So it was not long after that. I think it was like about a year after that that my doctor had said, Sarah, like your inflammation rate is so low, and we've done an ileoscopy. There are like no signs of Crohn's in your body for the first time ever in your entire life. I remember being told that and just being like, oh my God, this is like a day I could have never even like dreamed of, that I didn't even think was possible. It's definitely a result of, I think every single thing I've gone through, the surgeries, the medication, and Stellaire 100% is, a great medication for me. I was not symptomatic after ostomy life. I had a couple blockages, and I did have one flare up that lasted a couple days, um, due to a very intenseful, like stressful life event, where I was in the hospital. But besides that, I didn't live with pain. I was not experiencing any, chronic illness. I was not experiencing any Crohn's pains or Crohn's symptoms. The first thing that I would recommend in terms of someone with IBD or someone with an ostomy is, build a community in terms of, actually, Instagram is an amazing place, TikTok too. Of course, there's, Google to do research and stuff, but Google, like, the pages that you see sometimes are so medically oriented. And I think this is something that, like, I did a lot of when I was younger. I did not go on, social media and connect and look for, search Crohn's disease or search ostomies or search any of that. I completely disassociate from it. If I had done that, I think maybe I would have been able to, uh, be okay, or, just feel a sense of like not being alone, uh, like earlier on in my journey. I think being able to connect with other ostomates and other IBD warriors and survivors, like online, uh, will help with the coping mechanism a lot in terms of adapting to ostomy lifestyle and learning how to accept it. I highly recommend just, setting yourself like mini challenges, and getting uncomfortable with it. And if that means, literally walking around just in your house in, a pair of shorts and a tank top that your bag is out, or, like your undergarments or a bikini or anything just in your house, just to, be able to walk by the mirror, or, see a family member and get comfortable just having your bag out in the open. I think, and seeing it, it's it's like that repeated exposure, you'll be able to, just experience something new and be okay with it. You should also, be able to have these types of conversations, whether it's friends or family that you that already know about your bag. You can have conversations about your ostomy with them, and don't let it be a taboo topic. Never compare yourself to others. Even within our community, I can be at a certain space at a certain place, and someone else can be at a certain place, and that's their perfect place, and this is my perfect place. We all have our own journeys and our own trajectories. In terms of comparing yourself to somebody else, like, you will never be that other person. I always say compare yourself to a past version of you, because if you're in a better place, if you've made progress, if you've, worked on areas that you were not too happy with about yourself, and you have improved them from the past version, then that's progress. That's success. That is self growth. And, like, apply that analogy literally to when it comes to ostomy life.